Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this session, this Prix Ars Forum here in Linz, physically. What a wonder, for the artificial intelligence and live arts category. It's really live, so we're very proud not to be only remotely communicating, but having actually the opportunity post-virus to welcome at least two of our award-winning artists here in Linz today. So my name is Jens Hauser. I'm representing this amazing jury, I have to say, and I want to say multifaceted jury, polyvalent jury, 2 males and 3 female voices, but also representing post-colonial voices, and such different disciplines such as artificial intelligence, artificial life, biomedia practices, performances, reenactments, activist strategies, robotics, mechatronics, media archaeology. So all these disciplines that are ending up in this category that formerly was named the hybrid art category, and which some years ago has been rebranded as the artificial intelligence and live arts category. So I'm starting from the jury statement that the 5 of us wrote, and that we think that represent the tendencies that were predominant in this year's competition, with hundreds and hundreds of projects, brilliant projects from so different fields that we flicked through with a lot of attention. And we gave the title of our jury statement, Immaterial Infrastructures. And there's a reason, and we will find out in this session with the 3 award-winning artists, why is that? And we have projects dealing with toxic human-made clouds, with space travel agencies, with geological collections, works on hazardous working collections in the global high-tech IT industry, information and computational systems, laboratory settings, biopolitical and medical constellations, but also artworks dealing with warfare and surveillance technologies. And all these infrastructures we felt were used, addressed, questioned, critically analyzed by the award-winning cultural practitioners here in the artificial intelligence and live arts category. So we felt that the awarded artists were characterized by a quest to emphasize those materials which make our supposedly immaterial technologies possible, and then stage underlying processes and unsuspected structure that have in turn real impacts on multiple forms of lives, from the macro to the very micro level. And this in the context of geopolitics, body politics, human-made changes of contemporary logics, and also attempts to escape planet Earth. So at times these projects have been dystopic, often disturbing, politically engaged, and sometimes also indeed optimistic. And these cross-disciplinary projects demonstrate the extremely wide range of artistic practices that fall into this category and which otherwise wouldn't have a home elsewhere. So we'll start to present the Golden Nica, the main winner, and we are very happy to have one of the representatives here remotely, unfortunately only. Samaneh Moafi is probably sitting in London, is this correct? You're in London, okay. So the Golden Nica this year has gone to Forensic Architecture, so a research agency mainly based at Goldsmiths, University of London, and investigating human rights violations, and working also in partnership with institutions across civil society, from grassroots activists, legal teams to NGOs, media organizations. And we found that this project was representing a kind of collective power of a large art as activism working group, and to make use of surveillance technologies and scientific modeling in simulation technologies for the greater good of human rights worldwide. And we have awarded this multifaceted work, Cloud Studies, which is making use and combining open source research methodologies, TV footage, 3D models, and so on. And we will hear this and much more from Forensic Architecture's representative, Samaneh, right now. Welcome to Linz, even remotely. Would like to meet all in person, of course, but your work is indeed very much located within the virtual and the real space anyway, so maybe you can just elaborate on what cloud studies is about.
Sure, of course. First, so thank you for the invitation and for the kind introduction that you did to me and my team. I'm senior researcher at Forensic Architecture, and so the Cloud Studies project is one of the key research streams that I've been overlooking. As you mentioned, we are a university-based research unit. And what we do is that we investigate cases of human rights violations with and on behalf of communities who are affected by political violence. The particular kind of the project of cloud studies is slightly different to our normal kind of like work in the sense that it is archival. It reads through a series, it's a kind of a reading through a series of investigations that we have done that engaged with toxic clouds. And I'm talking about, for example, clouds of tear gas, clouds of carbon, from forest fires, so on and so forth. And so that's kind of like, that's an important thing to keep in mind while you're engaging with the work, because each one of our cases, each one of our investigations are rooted in specific times, in specific cases, locations, and struggles. And what this kind of like this project of cloud studies is doing is to actually cut across these cases and try to claim something else. Mobilized by states and corporate powers, toxic clouds colonize the air we breathe across different scales and durations. Repressive regimes use tear gas, for example, to clear democratic protests from urban roundabouts. Carcinogenic plumes of petrochemical emissions smother racialized communities. Airborne chemicals such as chlorine, white phosphorus, and herbicides are weaponized to displace and terrorize. And with that, I wonder if you could kind of like to start playing the little clip that I had prepared, which is in fact the part of the cloud, kind of like a short part of the cloud studies film that engages with the case of herbicide. We also talk about, for example, forest arson in the tropics that create continental scale meteorological conditions, forcing millions to breathe toxic air. What you can see on the screen is kind of like the reading into our investigation on herbicide. You can see an Israeli plane in the horizon that is kind of like spraying herbicide. You can see a Palestinian flag closer to the videographer. In this investigation, we could find the exact chemicals that were used for herbicidal spraying. We were then told by farmers that their crops are being destroyed. So you can see these images of spinach, of basil, of chard that have these kinds of like that we can see their surface being eaten away by herbicide. And so how is it that the Israeli planes are kind of like flying on the Israeli side of the border, but it's the Palestinian crops that are being demolished? And you kind of like, if you're aware of the conditions of Gaza, you know how important it is and how valuable it is, every kind of herb, because it is kind of like there is only so much land and there is so much agriculture that can be done, and kind of like how it plays into the politics of food. But so in our investigation, we could show that the herbicidal spraying was done in a very particular time of the day, that the winds was blowing from the land side to the seaside, from the Israeli side of the border to the Palestinian side of the border, and it would carry with it the herbicide. And so what we had done technically was a cross-section of kind of like bringing together video footage that the farmers and field workers had taken from the ground, building a 3D model of it and calculating the path of the plane, then bringing it into a simulation environment and mathematically simulating the way the airborne particles would move and how far they would go into Gaza. And of course, we know that the kind of like the clearing of the border is part of the larger project of the Israeli military to kind of like to clear the border. And it's on this border that you have also other kinds of toxic clouds. For example, tear gas here that is thrown by drones onto civilians and peaceful protesters on the ground. You can also see the farms in the foreground. This is again the Palestinian side of the border. It is a basic principle of forensics that between solid objects, every contact leaves a trace. By contrast, clouds are the epitome of transformation. Their dynamics are governed by nonlinear, multi-causal logics. The conditions, this condition was apparent throughout the history of painting, which is something that we also talk about in the kind of like in the cloud studies film. When clouds moving faster than the painter's brush could capture them needed to be imagined rather than described. Clouds are always double. Seen from outside, they are measurable objects, and seen from within, they are experiential conditions of optical blur and atmospheric obscurity. Today's clouds are both environmental and political, as I was trying to kind of like show you in this example. Their toxic fog is easily surrounded by lethal doubt. When post-truth and denialism obscures acts of violence and compounds the harm, we, the inhabitants of toxic clouds, must find new ways of resistance. And so the kinds of what the cloud studies is showing, one of the ways to read into it is the kinds of techniques, the kinds of open source investigative techniques that we have built over the past years in order to bring accountability for toxic clouds, for those who are inducing the toxic clouds. And so maybe with that, I'll stop.
Thanks a lot, Samaneh, for this introduction and presentation, including the very impressive images. The installation is very well done. I just came to see the space, and you can see, of course, the video footage, but also all the simulation and also the art historical references to Ruskin and so on. So it's a kind of media archaeological piece that has a lot of political relevance like now. So I think that will question infrastructures at large and the difference between immaterial and material infrastructures, maybe when discussing all the projects all together. Thanks for the first introduction to your own work. We are going to move over to a second piece that is a piece by Adriana Knouf and tranxxeno lab. And this is working more around the topic of, let's say, space infrastructures and how far space infrastructures are normally, cyborgian spaces of created artificial milieus where, humankind is engaging in the creation of something that enables us to experience outer space life. And very often outer space life is referred to as alien and very often still on Earth, sometimes trans and gender and queer life may be considered as alien. Mm-hmm. So there is a kind of connection that Adriana is going to elaborate on this project called TX1, a project that addresses the political question of which bodies do get or do not get accepted by established space programs. Meanwhile, transgender bodies have and may teach society at large how all bodies would transition through their personal, societal, and environmental changes, and that all of them require support, care, and for their survival in space or not. So, in how far, Adriana, can you elaborate on this queerness, this alien being that is being represented by sending your transgender medication to space and having it coming back.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jens, and thanks to the jury for awarding this project. I'm quite honored. So yes, TX1 is a project that launched fragments of my hormone replacement medications to the International Space Station. And as a transgender woman, I take two different types of hormone replacement medications. One, on the left here is a fragment of my spironolactone pill, which suppresses testosterone. In the middle is a fragment of an estrogen patch, which provides me with exogenous estrogen. And on the right is actually a handmade paper sculpture that I also included in the project to sort of gesture towards all the absent yet present xenoentities that couldn't actually make it to space. Because this is a project that we had a very, very small volume to work with, around 10 millimeters, a cylinder 10 millimeters in diameter and about 12 millimeters tall. One thing that I do want to note about this is that the patch that I sent up, which is the fragment that's in the middle here, was actually a patch that I had already worn. And so this means that aspects of myself also went up there, of this physical body that I'm in, dead skin cells probably, also clothing lint, and so forth. And so, yes, this is meant to enact this symbolic exodus to outer space for those trans, queer, and xenotypes who don't always find the Earth to be hospitable. And so, as any proper space project has, we had a patch for this as well, which was meant to also engage with some aspects of the work. One thing that I do want to say, though, is that you never go to space alone. And so there's always a team, there's always a large number of people that are involved in this. And so this was a project that involved myself as well as 8 other artist groups who launched as part of the Sojourner 2020 project. And this was a project of this MIT Space Exploration Initiative, and it was, as far as we know, the first open call of artworks that went to the International Space Station. And so this project went up. It was launched on March 7th, 2020. And if we recall that time period, there was some things going on, especially in the global north. That was right when we started having all of the lockdowns and everything. So there was also an interesting connection here between sort of the confinement on Earth and confinement in outer space. But most importantly, as you gestured towards in the introduction, this project came back on April 7th, 2020. And to me, that is extremely important because it means that we did not just burn up in the atmosphere, that we were actually able to come back and survive, right? So this coming back was very much an aspect of resilience for me. And also, as you were mentioning, Jens, this project also gestures towards the fact that anyone who goes to space basically becomes a trans body in a certain sense because of all of the changes that happen within the microgravity environment. And so, this is something that I think it behooves us to actually think much more about this in terms of all of the different types of transitions that bodies go through, either through aging, through the hormone replacement medications that I'm taking, through going to outer space, and so forth. One thing I do want to also add to this is, as part of the exhibition here in the Cyber Arts exhibition, I also included a 3-channel video that was meant to use the TX1 project to begin to talk about questions of alienness, of rural life. I grew up in a very rural part of the US and felt quite alienated there and would actually sort of go into my backyard and turn a flashlight on and off as I was pointing it up to the sky as a young child to basically signal to the extraterrestrials to come and take me away. So, this feeling of alienness and probably a budding transgenderness as well has been there from a very long time. So the video sort of talks through that. It talks through aspects of this experience of confinement that we were all feeling with respect to the intersection of this project and the beginnings of the COVID pandemic. But also the video piece ends up by exploring questions of representation of queerness in sci-fi and the lack of it until somewhat recently. And it ties in to a very important science fiction source for me, which is the work of Octavia Butler, and her idea that the destiny of us is to be amongst the stars. And to be doing this even when there is a lot of really terrible things going on Earth. So the idea of dreaming about outer space is really also about how do we live on Earth. And so, this is how I sort of wanted to end the project as this hopeful note, right? That in a sense, we need to be imagining the types of futures that we want to live in order to live in those futures. I really truly believe that if we imagine only dystopias, we're going to create dystopias. And so we do really need to engage in thinking through what is the future that we want to live in so that we can begin to live into that future. So I think I'll stop there, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adriana. I mean, that was very insightful. And maybe there's a transition there when it comes to our next award winner, because this sounds very different from, let's say, Russian biocosmism, right? The male-dominant explorer going out to space and the conqueror and so on. And you are more about transition, experience, getting back, subtlety of comparing roles on Earth, and not this kind of Cornelian aspect, but it's about physical experience, about an ephemerality, and this ephemerality as fragility, not as a kind of very, very hardcore and hardware-based exploration. So maybe there's something in there where we can find a transition to the second award of distinction by masharu from the Netherlands. Actually, you both live in Amsterdam. That is quite amazing. I mean, it seems to be a hub right now, and we know that there are many hubs in Amsterdam around that allow for this extremely interesting work to grow. And so maybe you can talk about the Museum of Edible Earth that is also addressing other senses. It's not about visual imagery. It's a storytelling, of course, a storytelling that involves physical, haptic senses, olfactive senses, and not just something that we can depict, represent. So we go with all these pieces, I think, here beyond representation, modelization, simulation, and there's this twist between the reality of physicality of the materials and what we may imagine to do with that. So, masharu, would you like to explain how this idea came about to actually engage in a museum that allows to explore a kind of very forgotten cultural technique that is geophagy? Can you explain what it is and what is the fascination for you in geophagy?
Thank you very much, Jens, for a great introduction, and I want to congratulate Samaneh and Adriana with the prize. I want to say I'm honored to be with you here, and I saw your works on the exhibition. They're really amazing and resonate with me a lot. So to answer your question, I am an earth eater and earth lover, and this is my personal practice as well as it became in the last years my professional practice. As Jens just mentioned, I am based in the Netherlands, but my roots are in Russia, and well, for a while I was craving earth. I really wanted to eat it, and then I decided to try, and then I could never stop. I wanted to find more people who eat earth, and I was feeling that this was a kind of taboo because I felt like I couldn't do it quite openly in my environment, so I decided to create an exhibition where people would engage into clay eating. And this went quite well. A lot of people wanted to try, but also people were bringing their own samples of earth with their own stories. That's how I started traveling and collecting samples. Actually, I don't know if the video will be playing on the background or not. So there will be some visuals from the Museum of Edible Earth, but as well as some shots from the research trips or trips to exchange earth, and here I have some samples as well. So I would like actually to offer you at your own risk, because officially this is not recognized as a food product by food authorities. At least not in this country and not in general in Western world. Moreover, it is officially seen as a psychological disorder. It is mentioned by in the DSM, Diagnosis of Mental Disorders by Psychiatry Association of United States, a disorder, unless it is not a cultural tradition, but for me is not. I was not raised with this. So I want to offer you some earth which comes from the north of Russia. That's where my roots are. And this is clay. It is actually quite intense sample to try first time, but I want to start with it. And it is a sea clay. So when sea goes away, people collect it. And mostly it's used for skin, but some people drink it with water.
Okay. So how much can we actually swallow? I mean,
Well, start with a little
a
piece
stool-
I
okay,
propose,
well.
if you never engaged with this practice before.
maybe the small one here, right? I mean, this is a bit massive, right? So let's start with this one.
Of course, yes.
Do you want to try if this is...
Most definitely.
Is it testosterone inhibiting or?
You are welcome to take as much as you wish. Samaneh, I'm sorry you are not here with us. I hope we eat earth with you in future. One day.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I wish I was there.
We are going to beam you a sample.
Okay.
Yeah. Taste is sandy a bit.
It's crunchy.
It's crunchy and salty.
Crunchy.
Yep.
And salty. It is a bit heavy sample, I must say, to start with. And you just mentioned that the tradition is forgotten. But actually it is practiced in many countries. And while, as I mentioned, in Western world it is regarded as a disorder, in many countries earth as a snack is sold on the market. And it is used for healing purposes, for spiritual purposes, as a mineral supplement, but also just simply as food. And, well, you know, the traces of this tradition are found in, as well, the Netherlands. So this is the country where I'm based now. And here I have an earth from the grave of St. Gerlach. This is a saint, and people used to eat earth from the grave in 13th century because the miracles were happening on the grave. Right now, the grave is in the church, so it's all covered by stone, but the church is still putting the sand there. And it's possible to collect it for donation. I don't know if still people eat it or they give it to animals and plants, but the traces of tradition are still alive. And I was wondering if this scent is working, because it's not really coming from the grave, but the people working in the church told that the church can make any earth sacred. So then I collected it for the Museum of Edible Earth. So if you wish, this is earth from the Netherlands, the country where I'm based.
Looks like hummus a bit, you know, but
It should be a bit more easy than the Russian one.
okay. Yeah, but the Dutch food is generally, I mean, you're more suitable for our kind of papilla. Yeah,
Of course.
It is limestone, it is less intense in taste, at least for me.
it's a bit bitter, I would say. Yeah.
It is a little bitter, that's true. It's a little grainy, but not so sandy as this
But
one.
it's crazy how we lack vocabulary to describe that. And I mean, if we were to describe an image, we have already had a kind of very long description of it. I mean, it's very difficult to find the right terms, no?
That's true, and this is also part of work of the Museum of Edible Earth to describe the taste of earth, to connect earth in this way. And I have more samples here, but I guess I'm not going to take more time. I want to invite everybody after the panel, if you're interested. You're welcome to taste some earth or join us to the installation. It has 200 samples from various places on the planet Earth.
This looks like chili from Mexico. What is that?
All right, so this is the earth from Zimbabwe.
Oh.
When I just started with the project in 2013, I met an artist. His name is Edmar Kamudzengerere, Zimbabwean-based, and he told me that in his culture, it is quite common. In every place that he goes, he takes local earth, puts it into water, and drinks this water, not to get sick. This is a way to connect to local environment, a preventive way. And then he said there is also earth traditionally eaten in Zimbabwe, and I should come and visit. And actually, I just only came this winter, so there has been a while. And this is earth which is eaten in his home village. It's coming from termite mounds, and is called muchenje.
Okay, so the insect thing is in there somewhere.
Yes.
So
and
it has to do with termites, okay.
Absolutely, and people say it's sweet. I don't personally find it very sweet, but I also understand what people mean when they say it.
Yeah, it's got a bit of sweetness to it. Yeah.
I mean, I used to eat a lot of insects in Mexico, cocopaches and this stuff, but it's very different.
It is not as spicy.
No. But maybe one question to open up the floor. Thank you for presenting that. In how far is it important, not you as a practitioner, to say this is a performative practice, but to create this infrastructure, which is very traditional, which is a museum. So a museum is typically a 19th century invention of colonial powers in Europe and so on. So in how far to reverse the structure of a museum and to take, to actually to put the museum upside down, because this is what you do, but as a kind of educational experimental space, which is not to actually glorify and systematize knowledge and power, but to actually do the opposite. So in how far is it important for you to go through this process of creating an infrastructure?
Thank you so much for this question. Actually, this is something I think a lot myself about, and I was wondering about the word museum even, because indeed it is a problematic word in terms of colonial history, and this also actually relates to, I think, problematics of my work, because basically I do travel to different places and I collect something and I bring it to the city of Amsterdam, which has also, of course, a very well-known colonial history. And
there was one sequence in your film, an African guy telling you are from Russia, I'm not telling you this story or the secret.
Okay, this was something else, but this is a good interpretation. Actually, I was asking, because usually when I go on a journey, I also take earth, so it's about exchange. I always bring earth, mostly I bring earth from Russia, but also some other samples from Museum of Edible Earth, and exchange for local earth. Of course, I also buy it and pay money for it, but for me, this element of exchanging earth is very important. And like when we were in Zimbabwe as well, I brought also 40 earth samples from across the globe to the elders where Admire took me. So the part in the video was, I was asking, what is more tasty, your earth or Russian earth? And they were saying, of course, our earth is tasty, but when we go to Russia, we will say that your earth is better. Okay. But yeah, you are right. There are all these elements in this project which I am actually, honestly, really not sure about. And I also, even the way of presentation of the Museum of Edible Earth, we divide Earth by countries, so here are country codes, but then it becomes about borders, and planet Earth is not about borders. The Earth is not about borders, it is holding all of us as humans, so it feels like I'm dealing a lot with this confrontation also for myself, and what am I doing with all this, but it feels that, there is some kind of calling in it. I don't know if I have a lot of time. I see the time is running to tell a story about it. Do I have a time? So when I was in Zimbabwe, with the elders, they asked, there was a person talking to me, but Admire explained this is not a person, but the ancestor of the person talking. And they asked me, do you know what do you do with this project? And I said, well, here on the stage I can, of course, show all this footage and talk very long about my work, but I was thinking I'm not going to lie to the elder and to ancestor. And I said, I don't really know what I'm doing. I actually have so much doubts. And then I heard them laughing and saying, of course you don't know, because you're a human, how can you know what you do? But there is something that's guiding you to do this work, and you need to carry on, and when the project is finished, you are surprised with what is coming out. So I decided, at least for this year, to stop the doubts and just carry on, and later we will see what happens.
Okay, so that is a good transition. You said also it's not about borders, it's not just let's say a horizontal practice, but it's also a vertical practice. Geological strata and so on. And so, yeah. There's also some verticality involved in your way of questioning infrastructures. And so when we read through your storyline and the way that this story is told, it's less about yourselves. And it's very clearly much more about power structures that are embedded in institutions, and it is about your personal experience and the pride to be up there and to finally get this. So it's much beyond a kind of anthropocentric kind of individualized interpretation. So in how far is it important for you to actually challenge the institution and to challenge the infrastructure as artistic practice?
I mean, that's a huge part of the project for sure. I mean, just some numbers, right? Out of the 600 people, or less than 600 people who have been to space, less than 11% have been women. You know, a very small number of them have been anyone other than a white man. So they're just in terms of the basic representation, you know, it's quite lacking. And I will say that last year NASA did have a call for new astronauts, and I applied, of course. And I said I wanted to be the first transgender astronaut. And again, that's also trying to push these limitations that they have on terms of the types of bodies that go to space. Some other people have argued that actually people who are differently abled, who have different types of mobility, relationships to mobility, challenges with mobility and so forth, perhaps they are better suited to go to space than the quote-unquote able-bodied human, just because of the different relationships with the environment that they have, especially when you are in a microgravity environment where the ability to walk on two legs is not necessarily an advantage. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the things, but also more importantly, I mean, space has been a place that historically has been military, commercial, governmental, right? And I really think that we need to have the space, sorry, no pun intended, for artistic engagements with the outer space realm. Because we can't, I don't want us to be just replicating what we have on Earth, right? Otherwise it is going to be colonialism, it is going to be extractivism, it is going to be all of the things here, right? And so using art as a means for enacting, actually really enacting what might be possible for the future.
Maybe this is also creating another link to Samaneh's and Forensic Architecture's project. In how far is this questioning and alternative use of infrastructures that are available, let's say open source databases, available TV footage and so on, and then to turn these technologies that generally are developed in order to guide drones, to kill, to survey and so on, to turn them upside down and actually to reappropriate and have a conquest of these technology as a kind of citizen science activist practice, and to using the tools of aesthetics, right, and the power of aesthetics and the convincing evidence of indexical materials. I mean, and not to just stay on this iconic level of what is it to represent, but to actually physically invest these infrastructures and to turn them upside down. Can you just list maybe infrastructures that you feel that you can make alternative use of, and that artistic messages could enable citizens at large to do so more often?
I can definitely speak to that. So usually, as you know, and I want to kind of like go back to what the practice of forensics is. Usually when a crime happens, the state comes in and cordons off the site, separates it from its surroundings. Once it's cordoned off, the forensic team of the state is the only kind of team that has access to this site. So it's a privilege, and it has the access. It goes on with its expert opinion. It kind of draws the conclusions, and for example, elaborates what the causality was. In our cases, what we're trying to do is, so in a way, historically speaking, forensic has been the technology of the state. What we're trying to do is, in fact, to invert this forensic gaze back onto the state, back onto corporations, back onto militaries and police powers. And how can we do this? We do this because most often we do not have access to the site of a crime. But we live in a kind of like in an age where, if you recall, with with the Beirut port explosion, for example, you had tens and hundreds of citizens in Beirut who were, while the kind of like the burning was going on, they were taking out their camera, they were pointing it towards the warehouse, they were filming it, and they were posting it on social media. Right? And why would they do that if not with a kind of a hope, with a kind of an urge for alternative avenues, alternative pathways for bringing accountability to those of the state, right? So there is, we have been, a lot of kind of like our work is precisely that, is reading into open source information, for example, images and video testimonies that are posted on social media, but then also these are kind of like cases where there is image testimony of the event, but then also sometimes there is no testimony. There is only a memory. For example, in the case of the Grenfell Tower, it's only the memory of the residents of how thick the cloud was, in what direction it was moving, how far into the staircase they could see or not. These are all testimonies about these toxic clouds, right? These are things that we do not, like I, for example, do not have access to them, but I can investigate them through people's testimonies, through the kind of like, through accounts from within the cloud. And it's only kind of like, as I was mentioning, it's by moving in and out of the cloud that you can bring accountability for those who are inducing them. It's by the kind of like this breaching between constantly moving from, say, the testimonies inside the cloud to the kind of like laboratory condition that then examines the kind of like the shape of the cloud, its intensity, its source, so on and so forth. It's by that movement that it's possible to bring accountability for toxic clouds.
I think we have time for maybe one short statement to everybody, so I will ask you directly because you are also going back to art history, to Ruskin, to Howard, but also to Damisch's book on cloud, where, for example, the Broniewski experiment is also very central, that the depiction of geometrical architecture and architecture, right, again, is easy, but the cloud has to be simulated by a mirror, right? So there is nothing that structurally creates a cloud. So you are doing that. In how far is this interrelatedness between physicality and simulation something that you feel that this twist is very typical for what art making with larger infrastructures is about today?
It's the kind of like, it's, I mean, with that history also, what you realize is the entanglement between art and science. That the two of them have historically been kind of like much, they share a history. That kind of like the structure of the way to capture the sky. This is an engineering kind of like structure, right? In Broniewski's model. And so in a way, this is also the same a kind of thing that we do. It's by linking the world of aesthetics with the world of science, and it's that kind of like, and that intersection is actually such an interesting and valuable intersection to be practicing on, because of course, you know, like aesthetics for us there's many ways that we can think about it. On one hand, it's a kind of a training. It's with our aesthetic training, for example, that we can understand how many frames exist within a video. We can understand the kind of like the kind of the pixel sizes and the frame rates and all of those kind of like technical sides. But it's also because of our familiarity with the world of aesthetic that we can tell stories otherwise. We can narrate the truth and kind of like it's a construction in a way, you know, like our stories are narratives of what has taken place, are also constructions, and these are kind of like, it requires aesthetic. But then also science is very much part of that, because the whole project is about accessing truth and bringing accountability, and so science allows for that kind of practice.
Good, thank you. I mean, this is also pointing, I think, very brilliantly to the other art projects, that it's very much about an epistemological awareness. It's much more about the way that also knowledge, through the material way that media function, is being acquired, knowledge is being acquired, and not what is knowledge just about. It's not about the knowing what, but as more the knowing how, and all this is also certainly part of the experiences that are shared by Marusha and Adriana. So I have to conclude here, because time is up, and we are very glad that we could have this half virtual and hard real meeting, and hopefully have it a fully post-COVID video, not video meeting very soon. And thanking for everybody. And yeah, please, if you are here in Linz, go to the spaces, taste the soil, get the real story. And yeah, also dive into the incredible experience of watching these footage of this cloud studies, which is really very disturbing. So political art, creating epistemological knowledges, investigating infrastructures, this is what the jury this year took for the main tendency. So I will conclude here, and thank you all for being with us, and yeah, see you in 2 years when the category is up again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.